Now remember, a chordophone is anything that has strings that vibrate. It's spelled C-H-O-R-D like a musical chord where we have multiple sounds. But if you think about C-O-R-D like a cord of rope, it'll help you to remember that it's any sort of string instrument. Now, what kinds of string instruments, chordophones, might you already know? Let's put some thought into that. Anybody remember what this is? An acoustic guitar. That's right. A guitar can have up to 6 or 12 strings. Notice that there's a place for sound to come out. Usually most string instruments, most chordophones, have some sort of resonating box to amplify their sound because a string by itself is actually pretty soft. So this body of the instrument is our resonator. The sound goes in here and bounces around. In fact, if I were to actually talk into the hole without changing my volume of voice, you can probably hear a slight echo, and if your ear was right next to it, you would actually hear that it sounds a little bit louder coming out. It might be harder to hear on the video. I'm not sure. But all you would do in order to play this, obviously, with a pick or with your fingers, you would strum the strings. You change the length of the strings by pinching down on them on these markings on the neck that they're called the frets. You go in between them, and it tells you where to place your fingers to be able to change things. The longer the string is, the lower the sound will be. The shorter it is, the higher the sound gets. Let me see if I can do that one more time. Could you hear that sound going a little higher as I would go further down this portion? By the way, this is the body. This portion of the instrument is called the what's between the body and your head? The neck. And this place where the tuning pegs are to keep the strings real tight, that is, you guessed it, la cabeza, the head. So that's a basic structure of a chordophone. Now, there are other types of chordophones which you have probably seen. This is not an orchestral instrument, but we have several chordophones within the orchestra. Let's see if we can look at one of those and see how it's a little bit different. Now, the orchestral strings look just a little bit different. This is, of course, what instrument? The violin. Now, the violin can give us a diagram of what all of the different string instruments that are used in the orchestra, in the symphony orchestra, would look like. The only difference really between them is that the bigger they get, the lower the sound. Now you notice the body is still here, shaped a little bit differently though. Traditionally, this one has kind of a bubbled shape, if you will. You'll notice that instead of one center hole like our guitar had, this still has sound holes, but they're off to the sides. And they are actually either referred to as the sound holes or as sometimes the F holes. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking something you shouldn't at this point. Stop it. The reason they're called the F holes is because if you look really closely, you'll notice there's small notches inside of it that make it look a little bit like a fancy letter F. Okay? That's why it's given that name. But ultimately, they are sound holes to let the sound escape from the echoing chamber of the body. Orchestral string instruments also have a neck and a head and the tuning pegs. But you'll notice there's a different number of strings. There are only 4. Also, you'll notice there's something sticking up here in the center. The strings on a guitar and related instruments like the ukulele or the banjo have things that lay prone or flat against the instrument. These orchestral instruments, to keep the strings extra tight, have this little section called the bridge that holds the strings up off of the body of the instrument and at an angle. If you look at it closely, it almost looks like a suspension bridge's cables, doesn't it? Good way to remember what this is called in the middle. If you look closely at the neck, you'll notice something else is different. No frets. So how does anybody know how to play it? Practice, practice, practice. And they memorize where to put their fingers to change things. But just like with the fretted string instruments, our fretted chordophones, as I move down the string closer to the bridge here, closer to our sound holes, the sound will get higher because I'm making the string shorter. The longer the string, the lower the sound. The shorter, the higher. The other thing you will notice is, ooh, out of tune. I need to tune the instrument. But if you were to look closely, really closely, and maybe it's hard to see on the video, but if you see this in person, some of the strings are different thicknesses as well. The thicker the string, the lower the sound will be. The thinner, the higher. Okay? So it's not only length, but also width that makes it a control of exactly how high or low a sound will be on a chordophone. Now, orchestral string instruments are played a little different. You can pluck them to get a sound. That is what is called pizzicato. Say that. It's an Italian word that means to pluck. Pizzicato. But you also can use this handy-dandy little thing called the bow and draw it slowly across the strings, and it will play the note. The thing with playing a string instrument with a bow, you can actually sound more than one note at one time. Now, do they always sound pretty together? Now, you got to figure out exactly how to practice and play. And I will be honest, I am not a violinist. I know the basic mechanics. I can't make this sound good. I need to practice a lot in order to do that, just like you would also. Now, there are chordophones from all over the world, some of which even look kind of like just our bow, and people would pluck just the strings on a bow to make the sound. All kinds of different things. The big thing to remember, again, with chordophones from our Sachs-Hornbostel system, anything that has a string that vibrates is going to be our chordophone. Now, do you think that we'd be able to build a chordophone on our own? I bet there's a way. Let's see. Now, there are many different ways that you could build your own chordophone. Matter of fact, there are several different instructions for different types of things on the internet. You could actually look up instructions for building your own guitar or building your own violin from scratch. But some of those materials you have to put out a little bit of money to be able to work with. Your guys are students. You don't necessarily have the extra cash, right? So, we're going to just use things that are easy lying around our home to be able to put things together. Or, for those of you who have kits that have been put together by me, most of the stuff will be in there that you can use. Now, probably the simplest one that you could make is a simple demonstration of using a bridged instrument using a empty tissue box, a few popsicle sticks, or a slice of really thick cardboard, some tape in order to be able to put things together in a way that works, and some rubber bands of various thicknesses and lengths. So, let's get started. I'm going to use the popsicle sticks to make my bridge because I think that they are just a little bit easier to work with, a little heavier. and a little easier to manipulate. And I have heavy tape here. You might want to have some scissors on hand to be able to cut the tape as well. But first things first. Got to get a length of tape ready. And we need to make our bridge large enough that it can lift things up, but small enough that it can be moved if we need it to be. It needs to be somewhat solid, so we're going to put a couple wraps of tape around it to keep the different... now you're not going to cooperate with me. Of course not. Why would you when I'm making a demonstration video? You want the popsicle sticks to be lined up next to each other, and carefully, so they don't collapse on each other, wrap it a couple times to be able to keep them in line. And you may want to cut a section. You may find that you want to do this all the way along as well, just to make sure that it is nice and solid. I'll catch up with you in a minute as I finish wrapping this up. All right, now that I've taped things together, you can see I have a pretty solid piece of wood here that can act as our bridge. Now, you notice the tissue box. What on earth could the tissue box be used for? Well, it looks a little bit like a guitar body, doesn't it? One central hole, and plenty of room inside for things to echo inside of. So, instead of having our two sound holes off to the side, we're going to put a bridge across our sound hole to be able to make things work. But what about our strings? Having tuning pegs, probably a little bit too difficult, but we need to have some sort of string or some sort of chord to use. What's my solution? Well, easily accessible and in various sizes and thicknesses, rubber bands. We can stretch them around. Just stretch them over the box. And make sure that they are not only over the box, but also over the open hole in the box. Various lengths, various thicknesses. Just stretch them all over here. I have 4 that they happen to be different colors as well, but they are different lengths and thicknesses. And you see that they're over the hole there. If I pluck it, they each make different sounds. Pretty soft. You have to be listening real close in the video to get it. That's a basic chordophone. But let's see how the bridge tightens things up and can change things around. I'm just going to slide that down underneath. And remember, the bridge works in a way that it pushes the strings up off of the instrument instead of having them lay prone or flat. And because it pushes them up, it makes them a little bit tighter. If I stand it up on edge, we have our bridge, and the strings, as a result, are a little bit tighter. You can hear it. And by putting the bridge in different places, maybe not even over the hole, but below the hole. Let's try. Or maybe having it at a different place where it's really high. We can change the pitches that we get according to where we put that bridge and how tight it is, because it changes the length and the width of our strings, changing the pitch. So that's basically how a bridge would affect an instrument. But let's say that we don't have our tissue box. There's a different thing that we can use to build a chordophone. One a little bit more akin to a guitar where things lay totally prone. Let's see what we do. Let's try our hand at making a banjo out of different materials that we have. Now, I saved this cup from when I had a little bit of applesauce at lunch. Washed it out, rinsed it out, had it ready to recycle, and thought, I bet I can find a different way to use this. We're going to use this just like our echoing chamber for the banjo. Now, on a real banjo, there would be a drum head over the top, and that's part of what makes the unique sound. It's very much like a snare drum with guitar strings on it. But we'll get the general idea by doing things slightly different with this. This is going to be our echoing chamber. Okay? I've also made our neck. I took time before turning the video back on to take 4 popsicle sticks this time. You could also use a thick piece of cardboard that you notch in places for the rubber bands to stick in. And I taped these popsicle sticks together just like when we were making the bridge for the rubber band box that we made to talk about how bridges can move and change the sound on an instrument depending on their position. And again, for our strings, we need to have some rubber bands handy. I'm going to use these 3 rubber bands that are a little bit smaller, various sizes and thicknesses. Why 3? Because when I taped together 4 sticks, we have notches where they can rest. 1, 2, 3 notches in between that will help them to lock in place and keep our strings from sliding. Now the next step is to take a few good size pieces of tape that can wrap around and slicing them to tape to the back of our echo chamber, our neck. Why the back instead of going this direction? Well, because this might look a little bit more like the real banjo, but we're trying to get things to go in a manner where they stretch a little bit, not only over our echo chamber, but latch around the neck. So we're setting it flat on the back and taking the piece of tape and taping it down. Now you may also, if you wanted to, use some glue, hot glue or something like that to make it happen. You may end up having to use a couple different pieces of tape to keep it extra secure. I think I'm going to take another piece of tape, even though this is heavy fabric tape that I happen to be using, and just make sure that this is super secure. Because, hey, rubber band strings can get really tight and they put a lot of pressure on things. So we want to make sure that it doesn't pull itself apart. Just a little bit of overhang here. If you cut little slits in the tape, if you have overhang, it makes like little tabs that you can fold over and wrap around your instrument to really, truly fasten it in together. So now we have our neck and our body. Final step, really simple. Take your rubber band, put it in a notch, and pull it down and across. There's notches at the bottom of your neck too that will help guide it, so you may want to help it find its way in there. And that'll keep them spaced out across the instrument. One more different length. There we go. You can see it's not quite fully prone like it would be on a true banjo, but it is here, and you can get that effect that you would have of each chord, each string, having a different pitch. Now, if you wanted to, you could even pinch down at the lip of this, just like you would pinch on the neck of an instrument. And if you listen carefully, when I shorten it, it gets a little bit higher sound. So there you go. Briefly, you have made your own homemade chordophones. Remember, anything that uses a string or string-like item to vibrate to make the sound is a chordophone to play musical chords on. Hopefully you can have a little fun with this and maybe use a few different chordophones as ideas for putting together your own homemade band.